In and out of the Beltway, from large cities to small towns to the rural heartland, from sea to shining sea. This is Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.
Welcome back to this week's show of Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. I'll tell you what, we've got Ben Brunson, we have Frank Vernuccio. My name is Guy Wayman. Ben, how you doing on this day?
I'm doing just great. It's a pleasure to be with both of you once again.
And Mr. Frank Vernuccio.
Doing well in New York. It finally went above freezing. We're all looking forward towards spring.
Okay, Frank, you're going to start us off here. The Dems are rooting against America. You hate to say it. I don't like saying that. But the fact is what we saw, that's one of your lines. The fact of the matter is, last Friday, we got to witness something that we got to see the sausage being made, and we never get to see anything like that, Frank. And seeing that, we're starting to see the true colors of the Democrats come out because they're actually rooting for that total meltdown. But at the end of the day, I think Trump's going to come out on top. Frank, go.
Yeah, the Democrats might be, but I don't think the rank and file American voter is rooting in that direction. There is a problem that we've talked about on this program that is consistent for well over several decades now, which is many Democrat supporters consider the good of the Democratic Party superior and more important than the good of the United States of America. It's a major issue in American politics. What we saw in the White House was an act of absolute transparency. This president says in public exactly what he says in private. There's no real barrier there. Zelensky made a huge mistake. He forgot that he wasn't talking to wimps like Barack Obama and Joe Biden. He was talking to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was not going to back down. Over the years, the money that the United States has given Ukraine has not been a loan, has been pretty much a gift, as opposed to what the Europeans are doing. The president asked for something simple that would help both Ukraine and the United States, a mineral deal. Zelensky overplayed his hand. The president, rather than backing down, stood tough in front of the cameras. Zelensky made a huge error.
All right, Ben, Frank kind of started us off here. Trump has been consistent all the way along. When he was campaigning or whatever, he just says, I want peace. I want the killing to stop. I don't want to see these dead bodies anymore. He's been totally consistent in that fact. Ben?
Yeah, the whole incident was pretty fascinating. Of course, the deal had been agreed to by all parties. And the point of the White House meeting was just to have a celebratory handshake for the press. And I lost a lot of respect for Zelensky because that was an own goal. That was a forced error on his part to go in there and to antagonize the president of the United States at home. To me, the analogy I like to give people is this is like a longtime employee being invited after 10 years to the owner's home to celebrate, the relationship, and walking in and insulting his wife and his kids and his dog and his interior decorations. There are ramifications when you do that. Not smart on Zelensky's part, given the dependence that Ukraine has on the United States. I gained a lot of respect for JD Vance. This has not been widely, I really haven't heard many commentators say what I'm about to say, but what JD Vance did was very intentional. He inserted himself into that dialogue to protect his boss. It was quite intentional. He brought up something that was kind of petty. This was the fact that Zelensky is viewed by Republicans as having gone and campaigned on behalf of Biden in Pennsylvania. And that was kind of petty to bring it up, but he did it intentionally to take the fire from Zelensky onto him and give his boss a chance to cool down, because Trump was on the verge of really losing his cool, and that would not have been good for anyone. So JD Vance deserves a lot of credit for his actions during that meeting. I think in the long run, cooler heads will prevail. But what Donald Trump is doing is he has done what he needed to do to bring Putin to the table. And that is painful to watch sometimes because, of course, the Democrats accuse him of coddling a dictator. And as long-term viewers know that Frank and I are very much aligned with Ukraine, the invaded country here. But the reality of the war, let's start with the facts. This is a stalemate. Neither side can win right now. It is very clear that the Ukrainians are unable to gain Ukrainian territory lost to the Russians. 18 months ago, they launched the big planned offensive using units that were heavily trained by NATO and well armed, and they gained almost nothing in terms of moving in the direction of Crimea. I was very optimistic then that they would be able to gain some real ground, but they weren't able to. The only success they've had recently is marching into Kursk, where they realized the Russians had very few units defending their own soil, which was a very smart strategic move. It gives them something to trade away to the Russians in the upcoming talks. But Trump has a Herculean effort because the attitude of Zelensky is he's just going to continue to get support and grind it out in World War I fashion. And it took, remember, to end World War I, it took 2 million fresh American troops that arrived in the fall of 1917, the spring of 1918 to change the outcome on the battlefield and finally deliver one side to victory. So that's not going to happen here. And this could go on for years and years, just a massive killing field, as Trump says. And there has to be some type of negotiated settlement, and it's going to have to involve Ukraine giving up some of the territory it's lost.
Ben, I want to thank you for bringing up JD Vance. In the notes here, I said he looked very presidential. And for the first time, we actually saw him in the Oval Office acting presidential, not just on a campaign. He said something quite interesting, too, Frank. He says to Zelensky, you're using conscripts. We had not heard that term with Ukraine. We've heard that term with Putin, bringing up his people with conscripts. But then you see videos of them dragging people off the streets to put them in the army of Ukraine, which I thought was quite fascinating to see. But hearing that coming out of JD Vance's mouth brought attention to that fact, Frank.
Yeah, it illustrates the fact that Ukraine is kind of teetering on the edge of what it can actually accomplish. You know, Russia has vast resources and it's getting more from North Korea, Iran, and let's be blunt, China as well. Ukraine has been getting its resources from Europe and the United States, primarily the United States. But it also goes to a point of how we got here, how we got to this edge. The fact is, throughout the entire Biden administration, Biden provided Ukraine with just enough weaponry and resources to keep the war going, but not to provide Ukraine with the resources it needs to win the war. There is no plan. There is nothing but ongoing slaughter here. I think the Trump administration, even in its first term, when it provided javelins to Ukraine before the war, before the second war of Russia against Ukraine started, really was on a course to try to get this thing done one way or the other, to win it or to negotiate a way out of it. There's no plan on the other side. And I think that's what aggravates President Trump. The fact is, you have to have a plan how this thing is going to end. I think both Ben and I have the attitude we wanted Ukraine to beat the hell out of the Russians, to win this thing, to push them back to their borders. But the question is, how do you do it? And what do you do it with? And so far, I've seen no plans on the part of the Democrats or the Europeans on how to do that. Now, the Europeans are talking about they're going to provide boots on the ground. They're going to provide more supplies if the Americans back out, maybe. I'd ask the key question, with what? The armed forces of Europe are basically a shadow of what they should be. They're not even reaching the 2% minimum for NATO requirements. They don't have the tools to do it. The British Navy is basically, pardon the pun, sinking. It's a shadow of its former self. The armed forces of Germany, well, there's two types of ways of looking at it. You can look at what they have on paper, which seems to be marginally credible. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, most of their weaponry is unrepaired, unmaintained, and incapable of being used for anything. Are Britain, France, and Germany going to supply the entire bulk of their armed forces to Ukraine to fight this war? I tend to doubt it. There's got to be a way out of this thing. And that's what the Europeans, that's what Zelensky, that's what the Democrats, and that's what most of the media are missing in all of this.
Yeah, we're going to talk about more in our international segment coming up after our first break here, Frank. But something that was quite interesting that also came out in that meeting when Trump said, Obama gave you sheets. In other words, sheets and blankets. And he says, I gave you javelins. Now let's enter into our favorite person, Vindeman. Vindeman, listening in on that, who said, well, wait a minute, we know better than you, started impeachment number one. I mean, all of this is intertwined here because Trump gave javelins. He wanted to do that. Vindeman's listening in on this. And Ben, you know where I'm going. Go.
Well, that guy is just a deep state operative who, frankly, should be sitting in Fort Leavenworth right now, occupying a cell there. But look, Trump's point is accurate. He likes to make it because it's a very accurate point, and no one in the Democratic Party is able to push back against it. There was a lot of aid came to Ukraine during the Obama administration, but a lot of that aid was non-lethal support. Very little in military aid was coming out of the Obama administration. Trump changed that, and he gave lethal support, military support, like Javelin missiles, which gave the Ukrainian army the ability to stop all that Russian armor when the real invasion came. Those Javelin missiles were pretty critical in the early days of the invasion. So before the Ukrainians developed their own kind of cottage drone industry, which has somewhat changed the face of modern warfare with their FPV drones operating all over the front lines and doing a hell of an effective job. So a lot of lessons learned. This is a glimpse of modern warfare that reveals a lot that the West is unprepared for, like drone warfare. Like our artillery production being way under capacity. We were under 10,000 155 millimeter rounds a month we could produce in this country. We're up well over 50,000, headed for a goal of 120,000 a month. So it's been a wake-up call all the way around. But the funniest thing is to watch the Europeans, threaten and bluster and walk out and say, oh, that Donald Trump, he's so evil. He loves Putin. We're going to take over, except they have no ability to do so because, as we've chronicled on this show, the European military, the Western European militaries are a small shadow of what they used to be at the height of the Cold War. The German military is a complete joke. The British military is right on their heels. It has collapsed to a size that is frighteningly small. And they are totally reliant on the U.S. military to have any sting in NATO. And Trump knows that. And if any good comes out of this, maybe instead of all the empty rhetoric out of the European leaders, maybe they'll take some action and start to invest in their military once again. Although I won't believe that till I see it.
All right, Frank, another shining star was Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State. He put it, he was on all the Sunday shows. He went boom, 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 put it to George Stephanopoulos and all the other people. Rubio he's got a beat on this thing.
Yeah, it was actually refreshing to see that we have a Secretary of State. Under Anthony Blinken, all we had was another operative from the Democratic Party using his position more for partisan politics than for the good of the United States. And I think that's the general theme of the Trump administration as a whole, in this as in many other matters. What we're seeing is an administration that is actually representing the interest of the United States, not partisan interest of one political party.
And Ben, Marco had a grasp of the facts, and he was able to give it and say, no, this is exactly what's going on, Ben.
Well, I'm going to take a broader point. When you listen to all of the cabinet members so far, whether it's Scott Bessent or Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, or Marco Rubio, they are all 100% on board with their commander-in-chief, their boss, the president. I have yet to see any deviation on any issue, and we're going to talk about a lot of issues on this show that the president's being faced with. But his cabinet is in lockstep supporting their boss, And that seems very different than the first term. And I think it will serve Donald Trump quite well over the course of the second term. But we're going to go through some rough days before we get to the real improvements.
Yeah, that was Ben Brunson, and he's the author of The Falstaff Enigma and Esther Sling. That's going to play out in our next segment as well. You can find him at benbrunson.com, amazon.com, and Frank Vernuscio with the American Analysis of News and Media. And you can find him at usagovpolicy.com. This is Inside the News. We want to thank all of our affiliates on down the line. You can also check us out on our YouTube channel. And make sure that when you watch YouTube, you hit the likes and you subscribe. It'll really help distribute the channel across the whole people. We actually had some good ones last week. We had a lot of views on our Germany segment, which was really kind of fun to see. Thank you so much. Coming up, the reaction from the European Union and what's going on in Europe because it's in their backyard. Wayman Brunson and Vernuscio. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuscio, Inside the News.